Thank you. Thank you. All right. So there we go. So I want to welcome everybody to this event. I'm thrilled that
we only see the top of your face.
Oh, here.
On the laptop.
Yes, there we go. Okay. So I want to welcome everybody here on behalf of the New Mexico Association for the Education of Young Children and all the other partners who are supporting this event, the Learning Alliance and the Partnership for Community Action, the Child Care and Education Association, the Thornburg Foundation, New Mexico Voices for Children, and YDI, Youth Development Incorporated. And I'm just thrilled to have this opportunity for us to put our heads together, hear from Danielle, who has got more information about ESSA, certainly than I do, and she has graciously agreed to share her information with us. And so it's just a wonderful opportunity that we have to think about the opportunities that we have in front of us. So Danielle has requested that we hold questions until the end, so that there's a lot of material that she wants to share with us. And so she's going to be doing that at the beginning, and people are welcome to add comments through the chat. If you're at a computer, you can, at the bottom of your screen, you can see that there's a chat button where you can open that up and say, give comments. And Danielle and a colleague of hers at EducationCounsel in DC are monitoring that, and she will incorporate what she can of comments as we go along, as well as we'll have some time at the end for questions and comments as well. And that Danielle has graciously agreed to share her slides. And after the presentation, she'll email them to me, and I'll email them out to everybody who registered and or came to this event. And so I'm really very pleased that both Ian Escobar is here, as well as Adrian Pedrosa, who are going to help in saying a few words to set the context in New Mexico for this work. So I'm going to toss the ball to Ian and let him say a little bit about his work with PED and ESSA.
Thank you, Benji, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ian Escobar. I'm the Executive Director of Learning Alliance New Mexico. And recently we've been involved with some work with the ESSA, and we're excited about a lot of the opportunities offered. Our work focuses really on the K-12 continuum, so we're really excited to learn more about the early childhood piece. I think New Mexicans are very smart, and they've been asking these questions. So how does this work connect to early childhood? How does this work connect to college and career readiness? So we're really trying to get a sense of what that continuum looks like. As Badgie mentioned, the PED has also been rolling out some convenings and forums in 6 different communities across the state. And the work that we've been doing, really invites groups beyond that to kind of weigh in. So we're hoping that our work supplements and supports what PED has going on. We anticipate releasing a report maybe late February, early March, that we hope can inform PED's plan to the Department of Education as required through ESSA. As I mentioned, thanks again for joining us. Welcome, and excited to learn more with you today.
I think they could see me also.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, and welcome to this conversation. I'm glad we're having this conversation here in New Mexico. Just last month, the President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for Hispanics had an opportunity to get a briefing from the U.S. Department of Education on this very topic. And we're very happy to hear that the ESSA really builds on the civil rights legacy of the original law of ESEA. It offers the protections to our most vulnerable students, directing federal resources to programs and strategies. And the way the administration really views this is that early learning is an equity issue, that without early learning, we cannot address issues of educational equity and eliminate the disparities that we need to eliminate in K through 12 education. ESEA has really been transformed with the ESSA into a P through 12 continuum of learning. And so we have really seen this shift with this piece of legislation. The department's strategic goal is to improve the health, social, emotional, and cognitive outcomes of all children from birth through 3rd grade. ESSA really offers a state guidance document that we've also attached here in the agenda that really shows the intention to highlight opportunities available within the law to strengthen early ed and to encourage states to invest heavily in early education. ESEA contains provisions across programs to assist state education agencies, local education agencies, and the Bureau of Indian Education, including local community-based organizations, to support early learning in 3 main areas. 1, to expand access to high-quality early learning. 2, to encourage alignment and collaboration of birth through 3rd grade. And 3rd, to support educators, including early educators. Now, New Mexico is uniquely positioned to address especially the second one, to encourage alignment and collaboration of birth through 3rd grade, because New Mexico over the last 4 years has received a $37 million Race to the Top award grant from the federal government to create the system to align the P through 12 education system. And so this positions New Mexico perfectly to expand access to high quality early learning. We've made tremendous progress nationally over the last several years in developing and expanding early learning, as well as we have here in New Mexico. We made some good incremental progress. Nationally, we've seen over $1.5 billion in investments in pre-K. And much of this has been done through state and local efforts to fund early childhood education. We've seen an expansion of these resources. We've also seen ballot initiatives across the states to expand resources, such as in San Francisco, Seattle, and Denver. Nationally, we've seen some positive momentum as well as here in New Mexico. However, we know that there are still some state and federal funding gaps, and we know that the funds that are currently available are still not enough to address the growing diverse needs of children and families. And we certainly see that here in New Mexico. Here in New Mexico, we face over a $200 million gap in fully funding quality early childhood education. We hope that here in New Mexico, we follow other states and local jurisdictions' effort and fully fund early childhood education. The New Mexico legislature has an opportunity to allow New Mexico voters to invest a percentage of our $15 billion land grant permanent fund into early childhood education. This would also allow New Mexico to codify early learning into our state constitution and to really focus on that continuum of pre-K through 12th grade. ESSA has set this framework for the states. We hope that this conversation is the first of several, and certainly Danielle Ewen is going to really expand on what we as states can do. But we believe that this framework has been set to really create a birth through 12th continuum. And in New Mexico, we are perfectly positioned to expand this access and to follow the lead of ESSA. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Adrian, for pointing out those opportunities that we have and that we are taking advantage of these things right now. So with that, I am very pleased to hand it over to Danielle. I've known Danielle for I don't know how many years, but through a lot of national early childhood conferences and meetings and her work. She's had some conversations already in New Mexico years ago. And so it's wonderful that this is continuing. So Danielle, thank you again and take it away.
Thank you, Baji. Thank you, everybody, for having me. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but this worked out better for everybody. And hopefully I will be a wonderful video presence for you. It's sort of an odd way to talk to people, but I'm very excited to do this. I want to thank Ian and Adrian and Baji as well for that welcome. I thought that they laid the stage really, really well for the conversation we're going to have. Let me give you a couple of just notes at the beginning. Baji asked folks to hold their questions. If you have a clarification question or you want me to just address something really quickly, go ahead and throw that in the chat box and I will do my best to address it. Otherwise, we'll hold those to the end and I'll go through and I'll answer all the questions as I can. I'm also going to talk about the bill in a global way. I'm gonna start at a very 30,000-foot level and talk to you about the main provisions of the bill, and then maybe some very specific things around early childhood. And then finally, at the end, I'll get into some of the policy opportunities there are around as states write their state and local plans. And I want everybody to know that as I'm talking, I'm really talking about opportunities to build that birth to grade continuum. We're not talking about 1 year. We're not talking about just building pre-K programs. We're not just talking about anything before school. We're really talking about the opportunity to create high quality opportunities for children from the moment they enter early childhood programs through their third grade experiences and their third grade reading school. So we're trying to build opportunities for kids to have high quality experiences at each point in that process. And we're going to talk about how ESSA can support those opportunities. Let me start with an overview. I don't know if there is on other people, there's a ton of noise on my end. I don't know if people need to mute or if there's movement on a microphone. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me.
For everybody to please make sure that on your computer it says mute, that you're muted. And Kendra is checking that now as well. And so I don't hear any of that feedback, Danielle.
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
No, I think it just got much better. So
Good.
let me go ahead and start. I'm going to talk for about 50 minutes. Hopefully that will leave us enough time for questions at the end. But again, as I said, if you have a quick question or clarification, go ahead and throw it in the chat box. So the first thing to remember is we're talking about the Every Student Succeeds Act, a new federal piece of legislation that was passed just over a year ago in December of 2015. As in all things Washington, ESSA has many passed on a bipartisan basis. It also has created lots of questions. We actually don't even know what to call it. Some people call it the Every Student Succeeds Act. Some people call it ESSA. Some people call it ESSA. And I even heard a member of Congress call it ESSA the other day. So we are still trying to figure that out. I will refer to it as the education law or ESSA as I go through. The biggest thing to know about the new law is that it moves authority from design and state education systems from the federal level back down to states and districts to build on the work that they did in creating ESSA, ESEA waivers. This is a huge change from where we were before. So states throughout the years that we had the No Child Left Behind Act really talked to the federal government about their need for more control and for less regulatory input from the federal government. And when Congress finally passed the new law, states got their wish. So in some states, they're cheering, they're yelling and screaming, they're raising balloons. In other states, it's sort of the dog caught the car kind of an issue. And states are really trying to figure out what it means to create their own state education systems and accountability systems from scratch with little guidance. So we'll see how this plays out. What that means is that over the next year, 5 years, 10 years out, the precise meaning and impact of the law will continue to play out. We will see regulations, guidance, and implementation change over the next few years as states write their state plans and they ask more questions, as the new administration comes in and either writes new regulations or pulls back regulations that we already have in place. There will be significant change over time. This means that there are real opportunities at the federal, state, and local levels, but also there are risks. And this is particularly true in early childhood because the structure said, as Adrian pointed out, the structure allows for many more investments and partnerships and coordination with early childhood. However, this remains a law that does not mandate any early childhood investments. And so whether and how early childhood grows, whether we create those birth to third grade continuum, really is going to be up to state and local players who have the intentionality to do that. And so what I'm going to talk about today is where all those opportunities and risks are and how to leverage them to really change what we're doing for young kids. I want to say right here that when I give this presentation, a lot of times people think what I'm saying is that we should move all the money from K-12 into early childhood, and then we would have a perfect system. Obviously, I'm not saying that. In some cases, states and the state education agency and more likely local education agencies will decide to move some funds, particularly Title I, into early childhood. But across the board, some of what we're going to talk about is really about changing policy and practice to really do better coordination, to build continuity, and to better serve children where they are. So this is not about an all or nothing play. If you have money available, you're going to grow your early childhood system. If you don't have money available, don't listen. It's really about how you maximize what's in the law and where the possibilities are, and really how we can help state education agency folks and folks at the local level understand those opportunities and put them into their state and local plans to make them real. So when I say that the bill provides opportunities for early childhood, but in the end doesn't mandate it, here's what I mean. Throughout the law, there are references to early childhood programs, to early childhood teachers, and the focus in that language is on things like improving transitions, enhancing quality, and improving coordination, as I've mentioned. It is not about creating brand new programs for young children. What's really interesting about that language is that none of those words are defined in the law. And so when I say transition, I mean a very global approach to what happens to children as they move from one auspice to another, as they move from, and as they move between ages and stages. So as they move from an infant toddler program or classroom into a preschool program or pre-K program into their school, there need to be formal transitions. And those transitions need to include things like home visits, potentially visits between children in the new program, joint professional development between teachers, shared expectations of what children have learned and what they need to learn as they move forward, potentially sharing data about children's outcomes, potentially sharing information on children's health needs and developmental needs. Anything we have about children should be part of their transition. So again, those things aren't defined in the law, but present an opportunity for us to think about how to do this, how to build a system in a different way. However, as I said earlier, none of that will happen if there's no plan, if we're not intentional about how to approach that language that is in the law. And so we need to really think about where those opportunities are to maximize what we know about the law and to translate that into early childhood policy. So what I'm going to do in the next few slides is really explain what the law says, mostly in Title I, which is the bulk of the bill, and what that means for early childhood. So this is going to be specific to this section of the law, and you'll hear me say some things that I'm going to repeat later on about where early childhood can be leveraged. So Title I, which is, as I said, the bulk of the law, provides grants to local education agencies to be implemented through district plans that they have to write at some point this year. Those grants are supposed to support at-risk students in their learning to make sure that they get what they need to be more successful as they move through their school careers. A big component of Title I is what we call school improvement. The current law allocates 7% of the law to school improvement activities, and we'll talk about what those mean in a minute. So schools do have resources to implement school improvement plans should they be put in that status. As states write their plans this year, and those plans are due either in April or later in the fall, depending on what states choose to do based on the latest regulations, the plans must reflect stakeholder engagement and coordination with other federally funded programs. I'm going to talk about stakeholder engagement again in a minute, but it's really important to know that the state education agency, as they write the plan, has to show how they coordinated the writing of the education plan with IDEA, with CCDBG, with McKinney-Vento, and other programs that serve young children. So the first opportunity to think about where these things come together is in the writing of the state plan and the coordination. We're really hoping that these won't be check-the-box activities, that the agencies that have oversight of the different implementations will actually be talking to each other as they write the state plans. Title I requires that states adopt challenging academic standards, and the state must adopt academic assessments in math, English, language arts, and science with multiple measures of student achievement and be disaggregated by the local education agency and by various subgroup designations. In other words, as the state collects data on kids through assessments, they have to be able to say what groups of children were successful and what groups of children need more support by race, ethnicity, and other metrics. A big piece of the new law is that the state must create a new statewide accountability system. States had about 18 months from the date of enactment, which was December of 2015, so they're really embedded in this process right now. That statewide accountability system must set ambitious long-term goals for all students and subgroups. And I emphasize this because this is one of those opportunities to say that early childhood students are a core component of the state's success in building an education system. So if the long-term goal for all students is to be college and career ready, it stands to reason that we want to understand how early childhood can contribute to that. And it might be that some states set a long-term goal that is about early childhood. For instance, all of our children will have access to a high-quality pre-K program. That might be part of setting the stage for those college and career-ready outcomes. Some indicators are required to be included in the accountability system. Those include things around proficiency, another indicator of achievement. States have to look at their graduation rates. They have to show progress to language proficiency for language minority students. But states may also adopt indicators that are called school quality and student success. And these have to do with a range of items that schools have looked at, including suspension and expulsion issues, chronic absenteeism, the school climate as ascertained through surveys of parents and students and teachers, things related to teacher absenteeism. Some states are looking at measures related to teacher credentials. There are pros and cons on each of those, but states have an opportunity to include those indicators in their accountability system. Now, it's really important to know that if an indicator is included in the accountability system, it will be used to determine whether schools need to be placed into the improvement category. States must identify the schools that are consistently underperforming, the bottom 5% of schools, and the local districts will create plans to raise the performance of those schools. So as states create their accountability systems, those indicators will show which schools are successful and which need more support. It's important to think about that fifth indicator and its impact on whether schools should be put into an improvement status. Now, it might be that something is really important to understand. Take chronic absenteeism. The more we know about which children are chronically absent, the more likely we are to get them into school. But we don't want that to be an indicator of school success. So it might be something that states choose to report on in their state report cards that I'm going to talk about in a minute, but not identify as an indicator of whether schools are successful or not. As part of the accountability system, states may choose to adopt things like a kindergarten entrance assessment or indicators or other measures, such as participation in high-quality full-day early childhood programs or information from the New Mexico Kindergarten Observation Tool, that all of those might be included in the assessment system. This is particularly important to think about because in many states, the accountability system starts at 3rd grade because that's where we have measures on reading and math. That's where we start to really look at those outcomes for children, which means that from kindergarten to 3rd grade, those first 4 years of a children's education, we don't have really good information about what's happening with our students. We don't have good information about what's going on in the schools they attend, and we have a huge missed opportunity. And so part of what we really want schools and districts and states to start thinking about is how can you design data systems, how can you collect information and then create interventions for young children that target those earliest years? Because as somebody in my office once said, we have kids from kindergarten to when they're 18 years old. In 3rd grade, they're 9. If you've missed half of their educational time if you don't start looking at them until after 3rd grade. So we really want to maximize that first half of their schooling and make sure that we know what's going on with them and are creating data systems that will collect information in those first few years. Accountability systems can also include measures of school discipline, as I said, such as suspension and expulsion. This is really important when we think about early childhood and is something to really keep in mind as I go through the rest of the slides. Suspension and expulsion data shows that children in early childhood programs in pre-K have very, very high rates of suspension and expulsion, especially boys of color. It's something that we're trying to deal with at the national level to really get information out to providers to get better training. The more information we have on which children are being suspended and expelled and at which grades, the better we can do to support them and their families and get them what they need to be successful. Many of us are arguing that pre-K suspension and expulsion should be included at least as a measure so that we can move to a place where those children are no longer being kicked out of school. But you'll hear me talk about that a little bit more as I move through the slides. States, as part of Title I, must also provide evidence that they've adopted challenging academic content standards and, importantly, have aligned those achievement standards for across the grade levels so that we have information on all children and that we're doing they have a continuum of learning. As I've said several times, part of building the accountability system is identifying schools that are in need of improvement. When schools are identified as in need of improvement, there are 3 categories: comprehensive support and improvement, targeted schools, or schools that need additional support. The state and the local district are required to give different levels of support when a school is put into those categories, and I'll talk about that. Finally, states must create report cards at the state and local level that provide information on student progress at the subgroup level. States get to decide in a lot of ways what goes into those report cards, and this is the place to really think about what measures we want to collect that will tell us things about children and their families that we can act on to make them more successful moving forward. So the information in the report cards might be the same information that's in the accountability system, but it might be additional information as well that tells us what's going on with children and their families at the school level, that might provide diagnostic information so that we can get resources to schools, to districts, to children and families before they fall into the improvement status, so that we're really improving what happens with kids throughout their experience. I mentioned that stakeholder engagement is a big part of the law. As the law was being passed, there was a real emphasis on the need for state plans and for district plans to be developed with the point of view of those affected by the plans. And Congress really wanted there to be an active level of stakeholder engagement. In the past, many of you have been involved in stakeholder engagement processes, I'm sure, where you invited into a meeting and people did a big PowerPoint presentation and they said, you agree, right? And everybody was like, well, we're not sure. And they're like, okay, meeting adjourned. And that was the stakeholder engagement. This was a real effort to try and have meaningful, authentic engagement of the people involved in the process. And so the state and district plans must show that they engage stakeholders. Importantly, regulations came out in November that said that stakeholder engagement must include early childhood teachers and leaders in order to be valid, in order to really pass the review that we expect the department to place on stakeholder engagement. This is a change from where the regulations had been before the fall. And so many states have had to go back and say, okay, how are we going to engage the early childhood community in this plan? This is a huge opportunity for us to raise the kinds of issues we're talking about today with the Department of Public Education, and to say, this is what matters to us, these are the kind of policy options we hope that you will think about, and to make sure that the voices of the early childhood community are heard. The department, as I said, pushed back the dates that states have to put in their plans, partially to give states more time in general to implement, but also to make sure that they could get all of the stakeholder engagement input that they needed to get. I will say that many people at this point, when I give this presentation, say, Danielle, you mentioned new regulations that came out in November. What's going to happen with those? There is a new administration coming in about 2 weeks. They have stated that they want to look at a lot of the regulations that the current administration has put in place. They have discussed that the ESSA regulations are something that they will look at. So we don't know what the status of those regulations will be going forward, but we are suggesting that states move forward under the current regulations, and especially around the stakeholder engagement requirements. So that was a very quick introduction to the whole law, to the whole Title I set of components that affect how states will be moving forward. I'm now going to talk really specifically about where early childhood, early learning, and language appears in the law, and where the opportunities are at the state and local level. So the first place you heard Adrienne talk about, one of the key components that the Department of Education is promoting within the law is the opportunity to align systems. And there are a number of coordination requirements throughout the law that we have been emphasizing. So first, states are now required to describe in their state plan how they will support both local education agencies and individual schools that themselves choose to use their funds to support early childhood programs. This is something that's been going on for a long time under Title I. Currently, about 6% of Title I dollars across the country are used for some kind of an early childhood program, generally to serve 4-year-olds. And this is just making sure that that effort can continue. The state education agency is also charged with providing schools and LEAs with information about effective parent and family engagement strategies. We know this is a big component of successful early childhood programs. We know that the early childhood community has a lot of insight into effective parent and family engagement strategies. And this is another opportunity to partner with the state agency and with local agencies to promote better practices for children and families. One of the great things about the coordination language is that it provides an opportunity for the various state agencies that touch early childhood, and I know in New Mexico, it's the Division of Children, Youth, and Families, the Division of Public Education, the Early Learning Council, and others who have talked about, who have oversight of some of the policies, that this provides an opportunity to really think about how to coordinate at the state level and what the plan should say about how that support will look at the local level. As I mentioned earlier, the language in the law also encourages ongoing support for transitions between community providers and schools, especially between Head Start and local schools, as part of the planning when schools are using funds for early childhood. Because, as I mentioned, transition is not defined, this is a huge opportunity to think about how to set tables at the local level to really think about how to better coordinate those transitions. So instead of making one program or one set of parents walk over to the school and say, hey, can we sit in on your pre-K program? Can we sit in on your kindergarten program? My child is coming next September. This creates an opportunity to say to the local school district, you need to create a table where these transition plans are created across your district so that it's not up to an individual principal, it's not up to an individual early childhood director or a Head Start director to come to the school, but that everybody knows what the plan is. And that part of that planning is thinking about what we know about kids, what we need to know about kids, and sharing that information and ultimately building other relationships, including joint professional development opportunities, aligning curriculum and standards between and across schools and early childhood providers, and thinking about other opportunities such as summer learning opportunities for preschool age children before they get to the school door. So really this coordination piece is an opportunity to think bigger about what we're doing for kids and how we're talking to each other at the local level about where kids are, where they're going, and what they need to make those successful transitions. The law says that the SEA must demonstrate how it is coordinating services with agencies implementing the Child Care Subsidy Program and with Head Start. Specifically for Head Start, local education agencies are now required to coordinate with Head Start programs. The new law holds those local education agencies responsible for developing agreements to work with Head Start programs. Previously, the Head Start Act had required every Head Start program to go to the school or district and create a memorandum of understanding about how children were going to move between programs. This created real problems because Head Start would come knocking on the door and schools would say, oh, you're nice, but we have 100 other people we have to talk to, we'll get to you, we'll get to you, get to you. And then Head Start programs couldn't fulfill their obligation. So what the law has done is create a two-way street, a two-way obligation where both parties are required to have that agreement. Now, this is important for a number of reasons. One is that we want to make it as easy as possible for children to move between our systems. But two, this creates an opportunity at the state level to create model memorandum of agreement between LEAs and Head Start programs about what should be discussed, what should be coordinated. Again, we can talk about transitions, we can talk about joint professional development, we can talk about curriculum and standards. And so this is really just about making it easy for children to move between programs. I'm going to jump to the next slide. The next big area that the law talks about is in data reporting. State education agencies and local education agencies are now required to report on the number and percent of children who are enrolled in preschool programs. Now in New Mexico, you already have existing data collection efforts through the Race to the Top grant that might provide some really important insights into how this data can be gathered and reported on the state report cards and the local report cards. The federal government has said, we believe, that some of the information in this reporting will come from what schools currently report to the Office of Civil Rights about the number of children in preschool programs in school buildings. However, there's an opportunity here to say that that's only part of the equation. That's in effect the numerator for reporting that percentage. And the question is, out of what? Which population of children are we trying to serve? And what do we want to report on those state and local report cards that tells us what we have achieved with children? So for instance, if our long-term goal is that every child in New Mexico will have access to a high-quality early childhood program, and that high quality is defined as the highest tier on the quality rating system, then maybe what we want to look at is how many children is that, and what, so if that's 100 children that would be eligible for at 4, how many of those 100 children are in those high quality programs, whether it's school-based or not, right? So this gives you an opportunity to think about who the population you want to serve is, and to create a marker for the state to say, we've only reached 3% of those children, we've only reached 7% of those children. We do expect that there will be more regulation, or at least guidance, around this requirement coming out of the department, because the Office of Civil Rights has been collecting some of this data to date. Again, going back to Adrian's point that a lot of the law is about coordination and building aligned systems. The law very explicitly states that if an LEA opts to provide early childhood services using Title I funds, the district must say how they're going to support and integrate with existing programs. So in other words, to make this really concrete, this is saying, in effect, that it's not an all or nothing. The district doesn't have to, or a school doesn't have to say, we're going to pay for all of the pre-K slots. What it's saying is that those funds that are available to use for early childhood can be used for a range of services to improve children's experience. So it could be there's existing slots in the community and we're going to add money to build quality. There's existing slots in the community, we're going to add money to make them full day, full year. There's existing slots in the community, but the providers don't have the right, don't have enough professional development, we're going to pay for that. It might be that we understand now that the community has existing slots, but there's not full day kindergarten, so we're going to use this money to pay for full day kindergarten. It can also pay for developmental screenings and assessments, home visiting, transportation needs. Importantly, this is a way of thinking about Title I funds available for early childhood as part of how you create a comprehensive, high quality experience for young children. That is, the dollars can be used not just for direct service, but for all the wraparound services that create a quality environment for kids. It's really important to remember that as states and local districts are moving forward with their ideas on how to spend money for early childhood. The law talks about meeting standards. The legislation makes it clear that the LEA must demonstrate that any program funded through Title I for early childhood must meet the Head Start standards. That's what the law says. There's actually tremendous confusion in the way the law is written about what that means. And so in the fall, the department used its non-regulatory guidance, which you have been sent, to sort of provide some clarification. And what they have said is that districts should look at the Head Start Child Early Learning Outcomes Framework for children birth to 5 and use that to guide their decision-making about what the standards that guide their new program look like. To put that into much simpler terms, in many cases, states and districts came back to the Department of Education and said, we can't meet Head Start standards. We can't do those 1,600 things, now 1,300. We can't do teeth brushing. We can't do the kind of coverage that's required. We can't do all those things. And the department took a look and said, it's really about meeting the quality of the experience for young children. And the outcomes framework talks about what that takes to be done, what schools and districts can do to meet those requirements, and is a much less specific in how they expect the standards to be met. And I think when people look at the framework, they will really think that it's a great guide to how to implement an early childhood program at the local level that meets the requirements of the law. And because there was some, well, not because there was confusion, but because they're requiring that the programs meet Head Start standards, the law also says that the Federal Department of Education and the Federal Department of Health and Human Services have to support states, provide technical assistance and other information to help programs implement. And this can be a real opportunity to build more coordination at the state and local level, and to make connections to existing partnerships, such as the Early Head Start childcare partnerships that may be in your state, to better connect across those federal programs. I've mentioned professional development a number of times. The law in Title II has significant resources and time spent on what we need to do to build the knowledge and skills of teachers. This is one of the places where the law was very specific about including early childhood educators. So Titles I, II, and III talk about encouraging professional development across the board. And in every section, they talk about including early childhood providers. And the goal of that language, and it explicitly states, is to expand the child development knowledge of principals and other school leaders. This is actually really radically new for an education law to talk about the need to build child development knowledge for children up to age 8 in the school leadership. Previously, those children weren't mentioned. We've talked to lots of principals, as I know you all have, about their lack of knowledge in many cases about the development of young children. And so it's really exciting that the law calls out the need to build this level of knowledge in our leaders in our school buildings. The language really explicitly talks about the need for joint professional development. That is that that teachers that are school-based, principals that are school-based, and those who are in the community, Head Start providers, childcare providers, and others, should come together in common professional development opportunities. This is very important because while this was allowed previously under No Child Left Behind, many communities were unable to implement it because they really felt like they couldn't use those dollars for teachers that weren't in their school building. So the fact that the law explicitly says that we should be doing joint professional development is a big change and creates a real opportunity to expand where we have high quality professional development. Another piece that came out of the changes in the new law focus on educator evaluation systems. Educator evaluation systems were a very controversial piece of the current administration's efforts to reform education. The new law does away with those. States can now choose whether they want to have an evaluation system. But if a state does, it's really important to make sure that that includes early childhood classrooms, pre-K, kindergarten 1, 2, and thinks about a variation on the rubric and is specific to early childhood and the needs of those classrooms. And again, that can happen through the resources in these sections. It also, because the law now talks explicitly about early childhood and we want to think about those younger children, it may be that states want to think differently about the kinds of PD they provide, think about coaching and mentoring, think about partnering with early childhood providers in the community to create new coaches and mentors, to create new partnerships across those various auspices. The other thing to think about is the state just finished writing its Child Care and Development Block Grant Plan for the next 3 years, which includes a section on workforce development. Having already laid out its plan for workforce development, the state might want to think about how to coordinate the resources available through Title II, potentially in Title III, with what they're saying they're going to do in CCBG. This is a really easy place to do coordination and potentially to leverage additional dollars. And again, because New Mexico had the Race to the Top grant, which prioritized improving the workforce, you already have some pieces in place that could be leveraged through Title II and other resources in ESSA. I've talked a lot, especially when I was talking about the overview of the law, of the concept of school improvement. And again, just to remind you, school improvement means that a school is in the bottom 5% of the accountability indicators that the state lays out. Once that 5% threshold has been hit, the LEA and the school must do a needs assessment. That needs assessment is not spelled out in the law. And so it's a real opportunity to think about what children need to be successful as they're entering school and what they need to be successful in school. I would argue that the needs assessment should include a landscape analysis of the early childhood opportunities available to the children in the community. What do I mean by that? As the district is laying out the questions to be asked, they should be looking at which children have access to high quality early childhood and for how long. So for instance, are only children at 100% of poverty getting any early childhood experiences through Head Start? Are only children in a high income community getting access to programs that meet the highest tier on the quality rating system? Are children of color more likely to be in high quality programs than other children? Answering these questions will give some understanding of the real needs in that community for early childhood and will help identify some of the approaches in school improvement. So for instance, if the landscape assessment finds that most children at or below poverty don't have access to high quality, that might be a real signal that some of that school improvement money should go to finding high quality slots for those kids. On the other hand, if we find that those kids have access to high quality, but they're just not getting enough literacy experiences and exposure, that maybe there are resources to build the literacy skills of the teachers, to put more books in those classrooms, to work with families through home visits on additional literacy skills. So again, using that needs assessment to understand what happens to children even before they get to school, and then designing a school improvement plan that incorporates that. Often when I talk about this, school folks in particular get a little frightened that I'm asking them to do a much bigger needs assessment than they had planned. Remember that Head Start and other community providers already do a needs assessment in many cases of the community and the landscape for early childhood, and that will at least provide a starting point for these conversations. I would also argue that this might be something where the state education agency will want to provide significant guidance, help and support, and potentially help gather data on what is available to kids and families. The other important thing that the needs assessment can and should do, whether it includes information on early childhood opportunities or not, is identify partners that can really build the range of experiences that children have as they're entering the schools in need of improvement. That includes early childhood providers. It also includes opportunities to do before and after school care in a different way, potentially to expand the opportunities for learning through summer learning, through extended day opportunities, and to access wraparound services and supports that will support children, whether those are mental health supports for children and families, whether they're access to medical homes for children who might not have them, whether they are access to additional recess time through new playgrounds and those kind of things, really using the needs assessment to gather that kind of information in those communities. The other opportunity, one of the other big opportunities in the law is to really focus on early literacy through some of the mechanisms in the law. So one way is to really look at what we're collecting on children, to include as a state accountability measure indicators of reading progress for children throughout pre-K to third grade. This is both an opportunity and a challenge. As many of you know, we don't have grade assessments on young children before third grade. We do have some reading assessments. Again, some of those provide challenges for children with special needs, children from language minority families. So it's really something to talk about as the state is developing its accountability system, to understand what's available and to think about whether this is a good indicator, whether there's information out there on early literacy that could be diagnostic, that could just provide information so that we know where more resources need to go. The law also includes a revised grant program now called the Literacy Education for All, Results for the Nation, or the LEARN Act, which includes a separate allocation to build early literacy skills in children from birth through kindergarten entry. This is really important because this is a separate carve out of funds that the state can access and then give out as sub-grants either to schools and their partners or to community agencies to build professional development around early literacy, to provide improved early literacy services, to develop new resources that promote literacy for very young children, and to disseminate effective strategies. So we're very excited about that. It's important to also note that throughout the law, early literacy is called out as an important intervention and opportunity to use funds for children from language minority families and other special populations such as children in foster care or children in who are experiencing homelessness. The other opportunity in the law that I always talk about because it created the biggest stir is the new preschool development grants. I know New Mexico applied for a preschool development grant about 4 years ago. This is a same name, different program. So we don't know what the program will include. We do expect that the new administration will write the requirements for how to apply. There are two kinds of preschool development grants. One is a renewal grant for those states that currently have a grant to continue their work. The other are what are called coordination grants, where states will be given 1 year of money to really plan coordination across their various early childhood systems. There are about $250 million currently allocated. They have to be appropriated, and we again don't know how that will move forward. So we expect the new administration will have a lot to say in this area. Importantly, the preschool development grants cannot set quality standards at the federal level, but states can certainly choose to adopt those quality standards. Also importantly, the new preschool development grants can be used for some slots, but the amount of money available for slots goes down over time. And so these really are opportunities to coordinate across the state level systems rather than to provide many, many more slots for kids. The other areas of grant making in the law are, the most important one is in what's called Title IV, the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grants. These grants broadly can support a range of services to support children, to support outcomes for children and their health and well-being. It's really important to remember that these can be used for our youngest kids. In many cases, we see the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grants targeted at middle school and high school students because they're about mental health supports, drug prevention, improved health and safety, but really thinking about whether and how those services are needed for our youngest children. I ran in the District of Columbia our early childhood program for several years. We had children as young as 3 experiencing really significant mental health issues and needing access to services in the community, and these grants can be available for those children. Importantly, those grants are based on a needs assessment that's done every 3 years, and again, that needs assessment should think about what the early childhood opportunities and challenges are in that community. Other grants in the law include the 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which were continued. charter school grants, which had been in the No Child Left Behind, the law now explicitly says that charter schools can serve pre-kindergarten children as part of their federal grants. That's a change. There's specific separate funding to encourage family engagement based on effective practices. And of course, the Promise Neighborhoods program continues in the law. Importantly, for all of the grants that I've talked about, the Learn Grant, the Preschool Development Grants, and these other competitive grants, money will have to be appropriated through the federal process. Right now, we are in a continuing resolution, so the money is there. The new preschool development grants, that money will have to be appropriated in fiscal 18. The Learn grants, we will see whether the appropriation moves forward. So we're still in a sort of a wait and see place. So what does this all mean as we're moving through the state and local plan development process? I've talked a lot about the law and what's in it. I've talked about opportunities. But what does that really mean as we're moving forward? It's one thing to say, wow, there's a lot in there and there's a lot of great language. It's another to sit down with your state education agency or your local education agency and say, here's what we want to say in the state plan. And so what I have on this slide and the next slide are some ways to think about very specific policy choices and conversations to have with the state and local education agencies. So I'm going to go through these options, and then there might be more questions about these as we move through. So the first one is to think about that fifth indicator in the accountability system of school quality and school culture, and think about whether there is an indicator, something like chronic absenteeism. It might also be suspension and expulsion data. Oh, that's lovely. Sorry, I just got a message that my computer only has 7% more battery, so we're going to try and find me a cord. And I'm going to keep talking. There should be one in my office. So chronic absenteeism might be the indicator. I think what's important here is two things. One, to be thinking about an indicator or a measure that is a formal indicator in the accountability system or just something that's diagnostic that is about young children. And two, thinking about whether and how that indicator or measure can connect to longitudinal data we have about children even earlier than their entry into the school system at pre-K or K. So for instance, chronic absenteeism, we might be able to connect to the subsidy system where we have information about children's attendance, and to Head Start where they have to collect information on chronic absenteeism. And to really think about where there are opportunities to start putting these pieces of the puzzle together so we can identify children most at risk and target resources to them, their families, and the programs that are serving them to really start affecting change for them as early as possible. So again, if you start understanding that you have a child in a family that is chronically absent at 2 or 3, and that there are things
While we have
tell people that she got off.
while we have a minute here, I'd like to say that Hart and Risley has done a lot of clinical work to find out about children from birth to 5. And basically, group 1, they say so many words to their kids, encouraging words, that they are 4 or 5 times ahead of the kids in group 3. Group 3 says more discouraging statements to their kids. And group 3 in this state happens to be more than 50% of the families. So with the kids knowing that they're failures before they even get to kindergarten, that's why they don't do well. And that's why the graduation rate in 2015 in Iowa was 92%. The average that year was 82% nationally. In New Mexico, it was less than 70%. And if we don't get more, as far as I'm concerned, poverty is not dollars. Poverty is words. Group 3 only hears maximum of 12 million words before the age of 5, and most of them are negative. Group 1 hears something like 30 million words by the age of 5, and a majority of them are encouragement, positive words. And it also breaks down to the kids that don't get enough words, they get a fixed mindset. In other words, they go to school and they don't do well in school, and so they have a fixed mindset. This is my intelligence. I'm going to figure out how I'm going to get through this life in any way I possibly can. Growth mindset, group 1. They like the challenges. They accept more challenges. They get in, yeah, you did good at that, Johnny, you know, et cetera type statements. And away they go and do well.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Audrey, can you hear me?
I'm done.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good time.
Welcome back. What a great
You can
what a great time for a break.
then hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we're here.
We're here. Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
You can hear me. You can hear me. Okay. Okay. So you have to go. So can you see my slides?
No.
My slides. Okay. I'm so sorry. My computer died and that was not planned. Somebody's working on my computer. Let me
Oh, I see.
my computer. Ben's gonna work on my computer and I'm gonna talk. So I was talking about chronic absenteeism and trying to link to bigger systems. And so the important takeaway from that point is to think about the fact that we want to start collecting information using the system that is being created through accountability to collect as much information as early as possible on our kids so that we can create interventions. Got it? Okay, hold on. I'm going to go back to my computer because I think it works now. Hang on. Okay. So let me share my screen again. Here we go. Okay. I'm so sorry, everybody. Okay. So the next thing to think about is whether you want to support something around your kindergarten observation, whether you want to do an assessment, a kindergarten entry assessment. Again, this can be part of the accountability system. It can be part of the measures that are adopted, but really sitting down with the state agency and saying, what do we know about our kids when they enter kindergarten? What do we want to know about them, and what do we need to know so that they have a successful career moving through? I mentioned earlier that we might want to think about suspension expulsion data by age, by subgroup. The law does not require that information be disaggregated by grade, but it might be really important to think about with your state education agency for suspension expulsion data, whether we want to have indicators by age and grade. And again, this is something that we can think about linking back to where children were before, especially if they're in Head Start or other programs. I talked a lot about including those needs assessment questions in the school improvement process. This is a multi-level conversation for the state. First of all, we want the state to encourage districts as schools move into improvement, we want to encourage the districts to use information from early childhood in their needs assessment. So the state will have to lay that out. We might also want the state to provide significant guidance about how that needs assessment should be done, where the data can come from, who they should be talking to, Head Start, other early childhood programs, other providers like home visitors and other folks in the community. We want to make sure there is significant coordination across early childhood programs at the state and local level. So really saying to the folks writing the state plan, who have you talked to? Have you talked to DCYF? Have you talked to the Child Care Subsidy Administration folks? Have you talked to the pre-K folks? Have you talked to pre-K folks at the local level and understood what their issues are? So really making that coordination question very real in writing the plan. I talked a lot about joint professional development. This is one of those things that people are like, yeah, that's easy to say, Danielle, it doesn't actually happen. How can the state education agency really write either regulations or outcome measures into the state plan that are about doing joint PD? They can say, we expect that when the local district is doing professional development that serves children K through 5, that they will reach out to include their early childhood community. That's one way of doing it. They might also say that as part of broader coordination agreements at the local level, that joint PD should be something that is addressed. They might ask districts to lay out how they've considered joint PD and why they are or are not doing it, but really encouraging the state to think about where there are opportunities for joint PD. Improved transition planning, as I talked about, this is a real opportunity to say to the state, as children move through the system, we want their information to be shared in ways that will support their learning. And so in some states, I was in Rhode Island recently, and the folks at their table are recommending that the state put into the state plan that every local education agency should sit at a common table with the early childhood community and that providers in that community and talk about what is needed, and that becomes part of transition planning. North Carolina made the same recommendation in some of the materials that you were sent. Align standards that include social emotional learning. We know that in early childhood, we look across the range of domains, but often that focus on social emotional and physical development gets lost as those standards are developed into K-12. So really thinking about where there are opportunities to support that full range of standards. Looking at the availability of preschool, really understanding what's available to which children and families, having the state lay out some of those questions and provide data and information to local school districts so they can make reasonable choices about what kind of programs are needed at the local level, where investments might be needed to either increase the number of slots, improve access to quality, or improve quality at the local level. And finally, supporting out-of-school learning time opportunities so that we're looking at summer learning, we're looking at extended day, we're looking at before and after-school opportunities for those young children. So let's see. And then capacity planning for those grants so that we're working with state agencies to really think about how to best invest and apply for those the preschool development grants, potentially for the Learn grants and for other grants. So the stepping back, and I know we want to save time for questions, stepping back, there are a couple ways to really think about this. And I have a slide here that really lays out what to think about as you're approaching your state education agency and putting it in the context of the kinds of questions that the education agency will be asking as they set out to write their state plan. So they're looking at accountability, they're looking at school improvement, they're looking at assessment and standards, they're looking at how to make sure all students are college and career ready. These are the broad categories that are in the state plan. And there's questions embedded here on the slide about what we can think about for early childhood that uses the language that the state will be using for the state plan and really makes starts a conversation around building a birth to third grade continuum. So I'm not going to go through the questions because I've largely talked about them, but I want to leave them up here so that as we have a conversation and y'all ask questions, you can see sort of some of the ways to think about this. So with significant and very real apologies about the technical difficulties, I do apologize. Let's move into the question phase, Baji, and see what folks, if they have questions, if they want to make comments, if they have other areas they want me to talk about, I'm happy to engage with folks in any way they want me to.
Danielle, I want to thank you so much for your presentation. It is packed. I'm glad we had, you had this much time to give us all this information. So, and some people joined on the call since I mentioned this. Danielle and I mentioned this at the beginning, but Danielle will share her slides that we've just seen. And I will forward them, or me or Kendra and I will send them out to everybody who's here, or email we have from registering, or just email me and let me know. So we'll get these slides to you, and that's going to be really helpful. So I would like to open it up,
We have one question from Michael.
Okay, can you read that, Kendra?
He asked, was an appropriation made with ESSA to specifically fund the Learn Act?
So can you repeat that?
Michael Weinberg asked about 20 minutes ago, was an appropriation made with ESSA to specifically fund the Learn Act?
Right, so as I said, one of the things that we are unsure about right now is what's going to happen with appropriations moving forward. We are currently operating under a continuing resolution that level funded everything from the previous law. So there is some money in there, but they have to extend the continuing resolution in March. So we don't actually know what's going to happen and how the administration is going to work that.
But in the room?
Yeah. Danielle, I have a question for you. This is Ian. My sense is you probably have an idea of the landscape across the nation. I'm wondering if you have an idea of some of the states that are kind of front runners in terms of doing this work really well and aligning early childhood and K-12 and what that looks like, and maybe some of the bright spots or practices they've been using to get to the position they're currently at.
That's a great question. So the first answer is states are really still in the very developmental stage of writing their plans, and so we haven't seen as many as you might expect at this point. Having said that, there are a number of states that have had these conversations or that have tried to have them. So for instance, in Washington State, as they were writing their state plan, they had an early childhood task force as one of the groups that wrote the plan. And that task force wrote its own, I think it's 15-page proposal that then went to the broader group to be included in the whole plan. And they really looked at each section of the law and said, we think this is something we should do in early childhood, and here's how we would recommend it. They said they were very clear on where they wanted mandates for local districts in their state plans, where they thought the state should write guidance, where they were just making a recommendation for action. So that's one of the best ones. In North Carolina, they convened a group much like you all have in the room that was small but mighty, as they like to say. It had some philanthropy representatives in it. It had representatives from local school districts. It had some folks from the early childhood advocacy community. And they sat down together and said, and I think Baji sent this out, it's a 2-pager that said, these are our very high-level priorities for early childhood in the state plan. There's only, I think, 5 things on it. And they sent it to the state education agency, and the education agency adopted it pretty much full bore and said, this is right, and we'll put this into the plan. Remember that the plan is at a pretty high level, so you don't have to get hugely specific in what you say you're gonna do. So in North Carolina, they were very focused on the transition plans. And so what they said to the state is, we want you to require that in some way the local districts show that they have tried to do transition planning with the community, and we want you to do guidance around that, and that we think that's going to be in the final plan. New Jersey did some very similar work with the early childhood community and school districts and sent their recommendations, which I think you also saw, and haven't been as successful in getting all of them incorporated. But what it did do was start a conversation with the state agency, who basically said, oh, we hadn't thought about this in this way. And so that was another real opportunity. And in New Jersey, which is a lot of people know has a very good early childhood system through the Abbott law requirements, it was interesting that the state education agency sort of had to be asked to look at early childhood. So you can't assume that leaders are doing it. A couple of other states, Tennessee has some interesting language in their plan. Illinois has done a ton of work. Their state plan is very inclusive of early childhood. They have a very activist early learning council, which convened a number of committees to think about how to include early childhood, and made a lot of recommendations, some of which were included. They spent a lot of time thinking about what indicators could be included specifically for K2, a lot of which are observational, and have made significant recommendations. It's unclear how many of those will be included. They've also done a lot of work in Illinois to try to think about the connection between early childhood and language minority children and families, and a lot of those recommendations will likely move forward. So those are some of the leaders. Again, we haven't seen as many of the plans as we would hope to see. I have heard from folks that the requirement in the regulation to include early childhood folks in stakeholder engagement and to be able to document that you've done that in a real way sort of had a lot of states going, oh, we have another step now that we have to go through before we can release the plan. And we have other stories. In North Carolina, they did, North Carolina? Yeah, they did a bunch of statewide meetings, as it sounds like y'all have done there, and didn't exactly coordinate the release of the plan with the recommendations from those meetings. And so there were folks who really felt like they weren't heard, and so they've gone back and are trying to really think differently about how to do the process, how to be more inclusive in the process. So I expect we'll have more, but those are some of the highlights.
Danielle, this is Rebecca Dow in Southern New Mexico. Hi, how are you?
How are you?
I am wondering if these funds have to be used for expansion, or if they can be used to shore up, can it be used to continue the efforts around the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge, or other things that are in place around professional development? What are the guidelines on?
Do you mean the Title I funds, the preschool development funds? Which ones?
All of the above, whichever, if they have different guidelines.
So Title I, it's really important to remember that Title I funds can be used for any child from birth through the age of school entry.
They can be used for direct services as well as a full range of comprehensive support services, including transportation, home visiting, developmental screenings, and other supports. So Title I can be used for all those things. Title II, which is the professional development dollars, they were very explicit that those dollars can be used in joint training with early childhood providers for any kind of PD that's being done. The preschool development grants, the law is written in such a way that the grants are clearly about system building and coordination rather than about direct service, although some of that money can be used for direct service. So for the most part, if I was going to generalize, I would say that most of the dollars in the law can be used for the full range of early childhood services, whether it's building quality or creating slots. There are very few places where that's not true.
Say something?
Yeah.
Brace yourself, because my comments have a long perspective. The first thing is that you talk about moving the program from federal to state, and yet you've talked for an hour about the federal requirements. So it's something of a mystery, if not misleading, to say that. I personally think that moving it to the states is a crazy idea. I was going to say stupid, but I modified it.
So can I just clarify really quick? A lot of what so there is no requirement that any dollar in ESSA be used for early childhood. There's no requirement that any of this be done, that any child below the age of mandatory school entry be served with these monies, right? What is being said is that if a school district makes the choice, or a local school building makes the choice to use the money that way, in some cases there are requirements around the kind of standards and around coordination. But there's actually very little in the law that is a requirement around early childhood, and I didn't mean to in any way suggest that to be true.
Well, I think that's a pity. I think it should be controlled as it was earlier at the federal level, so you didn't have this enormous disparity among states and among communities, and it's a and all the bureaucracy created at the states to do very little. So I think it's a great mistake and a great waste of money to decrease the federal control over it. The other thing I wanted to say is much of this presentation seemed to me to be indicating current things that are going on. From my perspective, there's nothing new. In approximately 1960, the Head Start program was started, and all of this stuff was discussed, and it was known, and there's no innovations about what we learned. We knew early on of the 0 to 3 learning situation, and many of the other things. So I think all this stuff is just, I can't understand why one would reiterate what has been known for 60 years as though it's an innovation. Thank you.
So I really appreciate that. Thank you for saying that. I want to clarify that what is interesting to many of us trying to help states think about this is that many schools and public education agencies haven't been thinking about early childhood in the same way. And that what the new law does is provide an opportunity to create a much more aligned system. Because to be really honest, what we have right now are silos in many cases, where kids are in early childhood programs, whether it's community-based childcare or Head Start, or they're served by home visitors, and the school community has no connection to that. I've been in schools where we say to the school leader, the principal, hey, have you talked to the directors of childcare centers in your community? He's like, no, why would I do that? And so what we're really hoping is that this isn't about innovation, this isn't about creating something brand new, this is about increasing access to high quality for children across the spectrum from birth to 3rd grade in a way that makes it easier for families to access those programs, makes the community, all players in the community, much more aware of what's going on and much more committed to improving the quality and getting children into those settings. So I agree with you that this is not rocket science. We know what worked for young kids. It's about making sure that we get kids what they need, because right now they're not getting it. And this is just
one thing you don't mention very much, and which is the most critical thing for children, is the involvement of parents. You mentioned it twice in the reading, and you don't talk about any programs directly focused on parents to get them to do the right thing with their preschool children, and that is critical.
Absolutely. And we really want states to think about how to use these dollars for home visiting. And to better connect with home visiting so that schools are doing home visiting programs. Again, when I was in the District of Columbia Public Schools, we made sure that every one of our early childhood students, age 3 and 4, had at least one home visit from their teacher. So I think that's a huge piece of this. You can use resources for that. I think I talked about that, but if I didn't, I apologize. So I think that that's a huge piece and should be part of our advocacy with the Department of Education, is how are we better supporting families with these dollars? I think that's a great point.
I have a comment that, let's see, when you were talking, Danielle, about the opportunities around early literacy, I totally agree. That's a wonderful opportunity for us. And to think about how early literacy activities can be framed in a way so that it is not, worksheets hypered up even more, but how can early literacy be integrated into a play-based curriculum where children have a lot of opportunities to interact with each other socially, to be actively engaged. Boys, but some girls too, learn so much while they're active and running and doing things actively. And how can we build that into early literacy? So that's not always recognized. Play-based learning is not always recognized, and yet I think this is an opportunity for us to bring forward that in ways that meet, as you say, these categories on your slide: accountability, school improvement, assessment and standards, college ready, all those things. So it gives us this opportunity to bring in what's rich from early learning, early childhood, birth to 5 work. How can we bring that into a robust discussion with the K-3, K-12 community? So I'm excited about the opportunity. And there are certainly challenges out there, but we have an opportunity, and let's take it.
So I think that's exactly right.
Larry Dudley.
I think that's exactly right. One of my colleagues in Alabama has used some of the quality money they have through CCDG and some of their school-based dollars to create kindergartens that are using a play-based curriculum and really bringing the different pieces together. And she's in the State Department of Ed, and she's working with local districts to do that. And so I think that this does create the opportunity to have those conversations and to build those opportunities for kids and to bring the best of early childhood up into K-3 rather than that push down that we've heard so much about across the last few years.
Yeah, wonderful.
Well, knowing what you know about New Mexico and some of the leaders, are we taking from this that we'd be well advised to start sketching out some parts of recommendations to add to this PED state plan?
Yes, ma'am.
So one of the ideas for this meeting, obviously in an hour and a half, we can't do that work right here, but we have an opportunity. Danielle, you've given us a wealth of information, and so I'm interested in who might be interested in working on a work group, and a smaller work group that could really take some of these and look specifically at New Mexico's situation and begin to write up some recommendations that we bring back to this group and even a larger group. And to involve more people in this discussion with some more fine-tuned thinking. Because I think we've accomplished a lot in an hour and a half. We've heard a lot, heard a little bit about what's going on in New Mexico, and so we have an opportunity now to take it the next step. Penny, you want to say?
Yes, I have a question. Thank you for the information you shared with us today. I'm looking at what I heard and thinking that when you say language proficiency, you mean in English language only. And I think that's a great concern for tribal communities, that we be also allowed to use the native language in instruction and in early childhood activities, but nowhere do I see that mentioned.
So I agree with you 100%. I know that the BIE is developing a way for the tribes to approach the tribal plans, and is having this conversation about how you measure proficiency and in what. In the in Title 3 and 4, where they talk about serving Native American communities, they actually do talk about building language skills. They don't explicitly say in the home language, but it is, I think you could make a very strong case that you can use those funds to support the tribal language, at least in early childhood, in a dual language program. I think that there's an opportunity there in the way the language is written.
And that's something that we could in New Mexico, in our making recommendations here in our state, we could certainly make that explicit, much more explicit than it is.
Yes, I agree. I think that if you're talking about quality education, you need to talk about more than one language.
Yeah,
you know, kids learning multiple languages is ideal. So I think that's one thing we've fallen short on too many times.
Yeah, I 100% agree that unfortunately, and just to make sure that we all understand, the way that the law is written, the accountability indicators that must be included for language minority kids are about their English language proficiency. So the law pushes people towards that. That does not mean we can't do bilingual programs or multilingual programs. It just means that what we're going to measure is about English language proficiency.
I have one more question, Danielle, in regards to where is there an intersection or new language around inclusion or least restrictive natural setting, typical setting, and how does that interface with programs that are full day year-round?
So there's not, because remember that language is actually in IDEA, not so much in ESSA. However, the department has put out really enormous amounts of guidance around serving children with disabilities, K-12 under ESSA, that's worth looking at. So there's not anything specifically new around children with disabilities. In the non-regulatory guidance that the department put out in October around early learning, they do talk about serving special populations, including children with disabilities, as part of one of the priority populations. And that when you're thinking about how to coordinate across those various programs that the state plan must coordinate with, and IDEA is one of them, thinking about where the opportunities to coordinate with the preschool Part B and Part C programs is, and where you can do more of that potentially. So the guidance talks about that. The early learning guidance talks about that. But it's certainly something to bring up with the state when you're talking about this. I think one of the places that we could really do a lot more work and we can leverage is around the joint PD. Very few of our teachers in early childhood have training in how to work with children with special needs, largely because a lot of those kids are still in the process of being identified. And so teachers, so when I was at DCPS, we held at least one spot for children with an IEP. But most of my teachers in a class of 16 had at least 3 kids with an IEP and potentially 2 more others who were on the path. So close to a third of their class had special needs, but they had absolutely no training in how to work with those kids and their families. And so I think when we're talking to the state about what kind of PD is needed, really emphasizing this for early childhood is one of the best places we can bring those two ideas together.
So this
On the
is,
phone.
yeah, well, if people are on the phone, you can unmute yourself and just jump in as Rebecca showed us.
They're
That's
already
great.
unmuted.
Hmm?
I unmuted them.
Oh,
I don't,
you-
I don't think they
Kendra.
can unmute themselves if they're on the phone. But
Kendra unmuted everybody, so that's great. I also want, since our time is coming to an end, to put out a request, you know, who here on the phone, on calling in, is interested in participating in this smaller work group to think about this. I'm hoping Ian and Adrienne, you're both. Who else? Penny? And Jeff?
Badgie,
Yes. Who was that?
Badgie, this is Chris. It's Crystal Pena. Add me to that list too.
Oh, great, wonderful.
I will, as much as my time will allow me to. This is Rebecca.
Great. All right, we have a great group, and if anybody else is interested, just let me or Ian or Adrienne know, and we will come up with a meeting time. That's wonderful. Any last questions or comments? People on the phone, thank you so much for participating, everybody. Yep.
Thank you. And again, I'm so sorry about
Thank
the
you.
Thank you for having me.
One more
Welcome.
comment
Thank you.
here. Penny, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to remind everybody that early childhood is such an age where you see children make leaps and bounds in education and learning. And, you know, I just hate to see that we're going to start assessing them or try to choose an assessment that's might be just one means of looking at children.
Yes.
And if we can make that as flexible as possible or as inclusive as possible,
Yes.
I guess is the right word,
Yes.
then I think we're headed in the right direction.
Yes, and play-based and recognizing the
Yes.
value of community and culture.
Yes,
All
there's
of
so
those
much
things.
valuable
Yeah.
ways of learning that
Right.
I just would hate to put us in a box
Totally.
again.
Yes, 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 no more boxes.
Well, there are countries that just keep teaching the kids about respect and et cetera until they're in second or third grade. So keeping them out of a box and getting them to know how to behave and get the growth mindset is far more important than a lot of the stuff we've been talking about.
So I'm going to formally end the meeting, and people who need to leave can do so, and there can be some continuing conversations here in the room, and we can even keep the Zoom going for a little while. And I just want to formally say, Danielle, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. It's really wonderful. You've really helped us a lot, and we'll keep in touch, and we look forward to those slides.
We'll talk, and I'll see you on Sunday. So I don't get it.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, thanks.
This
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
every January through